there are pictures of me putting down, urethanes with that brush. And then eventually the T-bars came along and I had to go. And where did I learn that? I went to Aurora, Colorado. Gary Reynolds started the training school there along with Mike Hodges. And, that's where the first time I saw a T-bar. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm off my knees.
Welcome back to All Things Wood Floor. I'm your host, Stephen Diggins. Today, joining the All Things Wood Floor Two-Timers Club, our friend and one of the most thoughtful voices in historic floor restoration, Michael Purser of the Rosebud Company. Michael's back, and this time we're digging a little deeper into the art and psychology of choosing the right wood floor finish. We talk about how urethanes reshape the industry, why some floors practically tell you what they need, and how pros can avoid blaming the finish when the real issue is most often techniques and expectations. It's a smart and nuanced conversation with someone who's spent a lifetime listening to old floors and the people who walk on them. Two-timer Michael Purser, welcome to All Things Wood Floor and floor pros around the world. Let's get to it. Michael Purser from the Rosebud Company. Welcome to Time Club. Back to All Things Wood Floor.
Thank you, sir. Good to be back.
You want to tell me a little bit about, tell me a little bit about your company, because it is a little different than other hardwood flooring companies or flooring companies. And then I want to talk a little bit about your article that's coming up, just to let people know a refresher of who you are and what you're doing.
Sure thing. My company is Rosebud Company. Started in Atlanta, Georgia in 1973. So I'm entering my 53rd year of continuous work on wood floors. I learned the trade from my dad up in Charlotte, North Carolina. Grew up around the wood flooring business. He was a wood flooring contractor right out of World War II. And me and my two brothers, we all worked with dad off and on growing up. That it was a family type business. And then when I decided to go into business on my own in 1973, I got a degree in economics, but I didn't, white collar work did not appeal to me. And I just said, okay, I want my own gig. I want my own company, and went back. And all three of my dad's sons, my two brothers, myself, all three went into the business, started our own individual separate companies. I went back and, did a little training with him, and then went back to Atlanta and hit the ground running, so to speak.
But your company, from last time we spoke, is different. If I remember, you don't traditionally run a big machine and edgers and grinders, and you do more restoration type, really high-end type work.
Well, I started off as a traditional wood flooring contractor, but I did start in an area where there was an awful lot of, there was just a ton of old houses. And after about 10, 15 years, I realized that kind of needed to shift and get away from some of the standard approaches, because the floors were just more or less evaporating underneath me. I mean, you run the big machine over an old floor and old pine, and you start losing what is known as the mass, the mass of the wood. And I stuck with that for a while. I guess about 30 years ago, I started doing a lot more restoration work. I kept doing the traditional thing for a while. And then I don't know, about 10, 15 years ago, I started really backing off and just trying to focus on providing people who had old homes an option that others did not provide them with.
Yeah, I know we had talked about a lot of the historical work you did. Remind me, in Wood Floor Business Magazine, you have articles of February, March coming up. Is that the issue that you're going to be in?
That's correct.
I won't go into all of it. What's the basic theme of the whole article going to be?
Well, it was interesting, Stephen. I kind of okay. Here I am. I've got a birthday coming up next week, and this is my last year as a septuagenarian. Next year it's the big O,
The big one.
and yeah, and I started reflecting. Kim and I were having a conversation. She likes to pick my brain, and which is pretty. That's a lot of time wasted. But anyway, she likes to pick my brain. And I started mentioning about like the history, especially of finishes, because my family was right in the thick of things when the wood flooring industry took the dive back in the '60s. when wall-to-wall carpet came in, it kind of put the wood flooring industry into a state, almost into a dormant period. And fortunately, my dad survived it and came out on the other side of that. And one of the things that I just felt like a lot of people today don't really know about is that I firmly believe that if it were not for certain products, and in particular urethane products, I think the wood floor industry would never have come back the way it did because the homeowners had made it very clear they did not like wax floors. And folks, I'm telling you, when I say they didn't like it, it was just something they would not do. They didn't want to do it unless they had a lot of money. It fell on the people in the house, the kids, the family, and they just made it clear. So dad and other contractors read the handwriting on the wall. It's like, okay, here's this relatively new finish called urethane, and it's a harder finish. It's more durable. It's more resistant to chemicals. And he just started working with it. And, he used it and used it very well. And they just built his business on the back of the urethanes. And I think, a lot of people have tried to put urethanes into a category. And initially it was like, hey, it's a plastic. And,
Right.
and I'm thinking like, so it's a plastic, or maybe it has plastic stuff in. I'm not a chemist.
Right.
I don't care to be a chemist, but it worked. It fulfilled a need, and the reason that it worked was because the homeowners, they're the ones that said, "This is what we want." Believe me, the trade did not force it on them. The homeowner said, "No, we want something like this because we do not want to go back to waxing." So there was a lot of history around that, and then I've had a lot of fun writing articles for Kim. Been very fortunate, been published in a number of other magazines, and along the way, I just learned a lot about the products and the history of the trade. So that's kind of where that was the conversation Kim and I went down, and she said, "Let's write about that," and I said, "Okay,
You
let's
know,
do it."
that's the start off point. I started this 40 years ago, and you're right. When I first started, people would say things like, "Oh God, no, I don't want floors. I don't want what my mother went through. They are cold and you have to wax them." Were they right? Because people really didn't have the money and funding for oil or electric heat. It was expensive. You get a floor cold, stays cold. Get it warm, stays warm. They weren't getting it warm. Second of all, they had to wax it, which we're going to get to. You look at a wax floor, it's gorgeous. It doesn't look like that floor, but it was constant maintenance. If you dropped alcohol of any type on it, it dissolved. If you dropped water on it, it turned to a white, spotted, salty thing. And then there were a lot of changes. So that's kind of the jump off point where we bring you in, because you had mentioned in some of your other work, the combination of the history of floors, the chemistry of floors, and the craftsmanship put this together, because I believe your quote was that hardwood floors are the most abused, neglected, tortured, and ignored surfaces ever, and wood floors need protection. So let's jump in there. Start off with where you were going to tell me things about urethane and how it did evolve as the dominant wood floor finish today.
Well, the technology actually came out of World War II. The Germans developed it, and after the war, we picked it up. The technology, this reacted isocyanates, and it showed up in a lot of products. And it started off as moisture cured, which was a beast, and that's industrial. For the homeowners, we segued into what is known as oil modified urethane (OMU). And when I first started hearing the complaints about the plastic connotation or stigma that people try to lay on it, my dad and I were talking, and the guy was very modest and quiet, but he said, if people want their floors to look like furniture, then they have to treat it like furniture. And that got me thinking. And what it did more than anything else, I just said, you got to turn this argument around. And if somebody says it scratches, and you like, hell yeah, it scratches. And it's telling you, hey, I'm a hard finish. When I scratch, something harder has come in contact with me. It's either going to be metal, it's going to be sand, but you're in charge of protecting me. I'm protecting the wood. You give me some protection. And that's when I realized that when you do see abrasion, the urethane is giving you a very clear message. Hey, wake up. You put something against me that's damaging me. If I get damaged, the wood gets damaged, and we don't damage the wood. The wood is the diva. Leave the wood alone. And so I just flipped that argument around and said, yeah, damage. Yeah, you can scratch it. But that, to me, it wasn't a negative. It was like it's giving you a clear indication to do something to stop it. And that's when I also, started realizing about you got to get focused on educating the consumer about how to live with these hard coatings. And, you know, I capitalized, I worked on that. And there's one thing I hadn't told you, Stephen, and I've forgotten all about this, but working with the urethanes got me a ton of work. And I can say that very confidently because for the first 15 years of my business, I had an unlisted, unpublished phone number. I was not in the white pages, yellow pages. I had no business card, no yard no sign in the yard. I didn't have the contact with the contractors, decorators. I got my work via word of mouth from the homeowners. Period. That was it. And when somebody called me, I already knew they've seen my work because the only way that they got my phone number was from somebody I'd work with. And, I've talked to them about finishes. Do what you did over at Sam and Jerry's place. That's what I want. It's like the whole thing about plastic. After that, it was like, it was a moot point. It just didn't make sense. And so I dodged it. The product got me a ton of work and I just ran with it.
Well, the history of flooring was that it go all the way back. The first floor was dirt, and they realized
Right.
we got to cover it. So they would take hay, thresh, and throw it all over the floor, and that's where the threshold came from. It would go from the house and drift out into the yard. So they put a block of wood, and they say that is the threshold, which was about 4 inches thick. So even back to lifting the bride, get her over the threshold, right? That's where all this comes from until they finally I saw it in the Midwest at the first hardwood floor in America. It was in the middle of a saloon in the desert. Somebody had the idea with the extra lumber. But what happened, like you're saying, it became part of construction. They learned it would char and it wasn't flammable. It would burn, but slow enough that you could get there and put the fire out. There was no carpet. There was none of this stuff. So what happened, like you're saying, there's where we come in. Well, they wear out fast, or the old country stores. They look dirty. They look filthy. And eventually people saying, I've had enough with the waxing. Well, we need wood floors. What can we do? Carpet destroys the wood industry. How did it come back? You said it, urethanes, the plastic looking look. A lot of places thought shiny was better. What looks more like plastic? A gloss urethane finish.
Yeah.
In New Hampshire, we've done nothing ever but satin. You cross into Mass, it's gloss. And you were speaking of this. That's where we get to when you were talking about in one of the articles I saw, it said what the trade did gain a lot from this. You said speed, durability, predictability, right? That's where this all starts to go. And where did you go from all this to what you work with now? Like, give me more about what urethanes were doing when you got into it and where you decided to just get away from them.
Well, it was the go-to product. It was dominant, and in the late '80s, we saw the waterborne products come online. I I got a lot of interest in that, and along the way, I decided that I wanted to take it one step further, which was to test products, and I would test urethane finishes out of 1,000 square foot warehouse where I'd put down, old white oak, new white oak, all these different species of wood. And then I'd start putting down the coatings and learning, refining my technique of application. I would test them for, the ambering by taking white foam core, putting multiple applications, and then putting a black strip over it, and then you could see, put it in sunlight, where it's got sunlight, it doesn't change. Take away the black and there it is. Some of them turn really dark. So there were some variabilities in the different coatings. And eventually when the waterborne products came along, I just jumped all over them. I was ready to get out of those rooms that was just saturated with just mineral spirits. Put me in a room where there's, I didn't have to wear a mask. I mean, I didn't have to breathe my own breath and sweat. And so I just followed the trends. The urethanes were getting better, stronger, more durable, more chemically resistant. And eventually we had the hardening oils come along, and that proved to be a milestone because it really did what the other so-called penetrating finishes or penetrating sealers could not do in the past. They were solvent-based, traditional solvent-based and highly reactive. And when those came along, it fit right into my program. But and the other thing it did, Stephen, is that it gave me more options to offer people instead of just saying, hey, this is what I work with. Be happy. I mean, be glad I'm here doing this, so to speak. And I just wanted to, my dad always was very firm about being a student of the trade. And I just wanted to learn as much as I possibly could. And then eventually it helped me out tremendously in my preservation work.
So early on, urethanes were a good thing for you that you, like anybody else in the business, were trying to get that durability, the protectability, take the maintenance away from people that had to buff and wax and polish. And so you gained all that, even the predictability of, hey, we know what this finish is going to look like when we put it down. How long do you think that you used oil urethanes before you hit the water? I did the same thing.
Oh,
Aquathane came out. The
I
greatest
know
protection
exactly.
since bark. You could drink. I
Yeah.
swear you could drink the stuff. It didn't quite work. But how long were you in the oil game before you?
Okay, well, I was in Kansas City in 1988, and it was one of the very earliest, if not the earliest, introductions of the waterborne finishes, and I was gobsmacked. Jack Coates of Golden State Floors had said I'd seen him out in San Francisco, and he said, "You got to go, man." And I'd never heard of NWFA. I went out there, saw the waterborne products. I just couldn't believe it. And so, what did I do? Took them back to my warehouse. I started testing them. I wanted to see how this animal work. You hear all the accolades and everything else. Well, that's PR, that's marketing, that's sales. Okay, we're the people, we're the hands-on people. We want to know what it feels like when it makes contact with the surface, how much resistance there is when you pull it. What happens when it gets to a warm spot in the floor from sunlight? Oh, whoops. It felt like, okay, here's a curb. I mean,
Holiday.
yeah. But so I was, by the time in the early 90s, in the article I wrote for Fine Home Building in 91, I was already talking and working with waterborne products. And eventually, I think wrote another article for them specifically on waterbornes. And it was probably only about 3 years later. By that time, I was into it. I just like, this is it. So we're talking, 92, 93.
Yeah,
And I'd
before
already,
street shoe, before all the. Remember, we'd be like, "Hey, you get 1,200 feet to a gallon." Yeah, we found out you got 1,200 feet. All right, it looked a lot like water, and I mean water. Some of them were terrible.
yeah, I refinished the floors in the house that I live in now. It's 100 year. At that time, it was about 100 years old, and I refinished those floors in 1994. And I remember I used Pacific Strong,
Yep.
put it down over everything, and that finish is. I haven't done a thing to them. I've recoated the kitchen area once, but all the other areas, yeah, that's all it was, Pacific Strong. And we're on our third dog. The girls were 4 and 2. They're now in their mid-30s. And we use that house. We do a lot of entertaining. We're active in nonprofits, so we hold fundraisers and stuff. Those floors have seen a ton of work
Michael,
or
Bona could
activity.
not kill Pack Strong. It was the first one that, oh my, it works. And people glommed onto it because they're like, oh, goodness gracious, it actually works. It took them forever to get rid of it and come up with traffic and some of the others. But you're right. The ones before that were hit or miss. You look beautiful. Get a call a week later. They say, put the dog's bowl down and the water went straight through the floor and it's staining. That was one of the very, very first ones. And what do you think you were doing then? You think you were the concrete filled heavy 40-pound T-bar, or did you have the light bar, or were you lamb's wool, and like how did you make it work with the Pacific Strong?
Okay.
I had all that
Yeah,
crap.
no, this is a good question because WB, my dad was WB person. He was dad, but it was WB. He taught all of us, if you're putting any finish down on the floor, you are brushing it down, period. I never used a lambswool applicator. If I'd seen a lambswool applicator on a job, I would have thought, you know, is this an animal? I mean, I'm sorry.
I hated them.
So, well, so when the waterborne came out, man, I mean, I probably went through about half a dozen China bristle brushes before I think they had that brush. It was about 15 inches long, had a handle.
Yep.
I mean, but it did the job. And you were pouring it out. You were no longer taking the brush, dipping it into the
Nope. Pour it out.
container. So there are pictures of me putting down, urethanes with that brush, and then eventually the T-bars came along, and I had to go. And where did I learn that? I went to Aurora, Colorado.
Yep.
Gary Reynolds started the training school there along with Mike Hodges. And, that's where the first time I saw a T-bar, and I thought, wait a minute, I'm off my knees?
Hands and
Okay.
knees. We used to be bragging, oh, I can do 100 feet every 7 minutes. And you're like, wow, on your hands and knees.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. But the thing is, remember when water-based, all of a sudden you did it, you're like, wait a minute. It's winter, it's dry, I got forced hot air, this stuff is drying so fast. Not only could you get off your knees, it just was smoother, better, faster. The coverage rate was still too much, though. It's still going on, dude, then.
No, it was a good product, and I used it a lot. But in the preservation work, I still was very fascinated by some of the notion that I'd be working on very old floors, and I just decided that I wanted to go back and do some research on that. And what I ended up doing, and I'm glad I did it because I learned a ton. I went to several museums, two in this country, Winterthur outside of Wilmington, Delaware, and then the other one is the Athenaeum in Philadelphia. And then for collecting information from Europe, I used the Victoria and Albert out of London. And I was just hit. I mean, I went to the museums in the States. Went there personally, and I'd spend days there going through the research library. What did they use? What were the products, and how did they compare with what we're using today? And surprisingly, what I found out was that all this, if you talk to preservation people, they keep talking about, they had these penetrating products. You just put them on, they'd penetrate, and then it was a much better product than these synthetic natural products. And what I found out was, no, they really didn't. They did have stuff that they could put on the floor, but most of them were coatings. They were, linseed oils, they were
Rock car oil.
varnishes
Yep.
and stuff like that. And, it just, so I was able to establish that using coatings, contemporary coatings in my historic preservation work there was no problem with that. It was consistent with what people were doing and wish they could do back in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. They didn't have the technology, but they were using coatings, and then they would just sit back and watch them wear away, and then they would just start literally dumping stuff on the floors, just more and more, because they didn't have an easy way of getting what they had put on there off, and that was problematic. And so all this talk about how the floors, centuries ago were beautiful. No, no, they weren't. I mean, they were if you had a lot of money and you had servants that could go in there and strap on brushes on their feet. This is a character named the frotteur. And then they would, you'd have the wax floors, they'd put the wax down, and then they would skate on the floors to polish them.
Yes, you
But
taught me that. Yes.
yeah, but most people didn't have that. I mean, and so the floors ended up within a short period of time, the waxes, linseed oils, those things darken. They get really old and ugly looking fast. The floors did not have the look that people, they want to romanticize about. In the castles, yeah, they may have, but they had money. They had the economic resources and the servants to do it. Your typical homeowner, they didn't. And it was a struggle always to try and have nice looking floors.
This episode is brought to you by Odie's Oil. Developed by a wood flooring pro, no finish is more safe, durable, beautifying, and versatile, with lower cost and higher profit margin. Experience the pinnacle of finish with free on-site demos and training. Learn more at odiesoil.com. That's ODIES oil.com.
I'm going to ask AI if there's anyone left on planet Earth that's a frotteur. Imagine, wouldn't that be the funny part of a comedy sketch? There's a person in wool socks that skates around your palace to make sure the floors shine, which you just said it was a real thing. That was a job.
Yeah. It was a real thing. And somebody, I mean, they did it. I mean, Thomas Jefferson had them when he was in France. And that's, Jefferson liked all things French. And I'm sure that that famous Monticello design, I think that is it cherry? I'm not sure what the design is, but the one in his dining room that became so famous, I'm sure that he probably had some of his slaves in their skirt, skating back and forth.
Right.
Somebody who'd never been on ice in their life.
On your life. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, that proved that was a big help, and it helped me establish what I felt like would be a good path to follow in terms of using coatings and providing people with just a good surface to live with and work with.
Do you think that the transition where it went into, let's say, the oils, then the waters, was the industry or the art or the craftsmanship losing anything by not having the oils and those complicated surface finishes? Was polyurethanes something I'm sure we gained some things, but did we lose a lot? Was there something that was just so different that people missed it?
Well, I don't know that I'm sure that we did lose certain things, but to me, we have to be careful about how we romanticize the past. I mean, if you went into somebody's house and say, they've got this, they bought a nice, I've worked in Williamsburg. You got a lot of old houses there. And I guarantee if you walked into the kitchen and said, let's get that, that $6,000 stove and, all that out of here and bring in a wood burning stove and cook on that, you might get some pushback. I think that the did we lose stuff? Yeah, we did. And I'm sure that there were some people who, prior to the evolution of the urethane and coatings of that type, I'm sure that they were extremely skilled at, polishing and making floors look bright and shiny and all that. But I think that there was a point where you just realize, hey, let's get real. Is this a sustainable model? I mean, is this going to be something that homeowners are going to want in their house? Because they're already complaining about it. So yeah, we lost some things, but I think that the homeowner helped us understand that, this is the direction. I mean, you listen to the consumer. If you ignore the consumer, then and the clients, it's not a good path to go down. So I think that it was part of our growing pains. Some people accepted it and said, okay, I need to learn this technology. I need to learn how to work with this. And then we also learned that we had to educate the homeowners and the people who live there about these new products and how to best deal with them.
Well, you think probably a good thing, the chemistry. You removed lead, naphtha, gasoline, thinners, petroleum distillates, all sorts of things, even in the better urethanes, even though they're still volatile. And then, thank goodness that you said that water-based finishes came along. But polyurethane or urethane at the time, up here it was Fabulon. If you didn't have Fabulon, you didn't get the job. You did not get the job. That was it.
Yeah.
Somebody was using it and it was considered the best. But it became what you call the default finish for floors. Making urethane the default finish for floors, did that change everybody's expectations in what they thought they would get out of their floors? Did it make it better? Did it make it worse? Like, nobody wanted to be, fratteuring their floor anymore, but sounds fun.
I think it. Oh, I hadn't thought of it before until this conversation, but I think it was part of the growing pains. I mean, one thing it's hard for people today to realize. I mean, I remember vividly when my dad his business just dried up. And I mean, they weren't doing anything wrong. I mean, these are highly skilled craftsmen. And they knew how to work with that equipment. We're not talking about the kind of stuff we have today. And, when it became a situation where the homeowners said, this is the route we want to go. And we want this. And I think that they saw it and they realized that there was, it provided that look. And as you said, stay away from gloss. That was moisture cured, nothing but gloss. Tone it down. They started there was no such thing as a semi-gloss when I was starting out. You just had it was gloss and satin. And so I think that little by little, the manufacturers, they started saying, okay, we're starting to hear what the clients are wanting. We're hearing what the problems are from the guys in the trade. And it was a matter that there were just some growing pains that we had to work our way through. The expectations when homeowners saw a freshly finished floor, it was, it was a memorable moment. They just looked down and their breath just left their body. And it's like, whoa. And, you're just like, okay, now it's like you are learning to drive a car. Okay. You're now looking at a vehicle and it looks great. It's either new or it's in good condition, whatever. I'm going to hand the keys of that car to you, and you literally have never even taken driver's ed. I mean, they have to be trained, and little by little they started to learn how to protect the surfaces. And once they made that transition, it made our work a lot easier. It just they knew what to expect, and then they started realizing, and I have to do this to keep it looking that way.
Sure. Let's break it down individually here. We're going to back up a second. If you go through the 18th, 19th, 20th century, let's go through a few because you're an expert with these things. Tell me a bit about the wax, shellac, and oil portion, where everything was such a hand applied treatment type of a thing.
Well, and again, when I was doing this research at the museums, it dawned on me. I said, look at what they're using. They're using a lot of the same products that they would be using on furniture, on paneling, on doors. So they were just taking one of the things that we in the wood flooring industry have always, we got the hand-me-downs. I mean, it took a long, long time before we had our own finishes dedicated for wood floors. And we were just using what people had used on, other surfaces, and it was good and you could get a good look. But we also found out that if you let the dog pee on the door or the dining room table or the furniture, you're going to have problems. If you let people walk across your table when they're coming in the house, with their boots on and all that stuff, they're going to have problems. If you set furniture on the paneling and drag it around, you're going to have problems. So I think they realized that it was a labor intense maintenance process. And for some people, like I said, they could afford it. I think that a lot of the products that people were working with were highly volatile. And as a result, there were incidents, accidents, whatever you want to call them. And that was not uncommon. It's one thing to put finish on paneling or a door in a room. Okay. It's another to take hundreds of square feet and saturate it with shellacs or lacquers. I mean, now we're creating bombs. Now we're creating a situation that you can just blow the house right off the foundation.
Easily. Yep.
So, yeah, those products were around. I've seen them. But I will say this, they were not that popular because people would still they would still put all types of varnishes, carriage varnishes. I read some of these old, descriptions in some of the I don't know what you'd call them. They were just instructions on how to refinish wood floors in the 1800s, and they were using varnishes. And they would go to their default was put whatever withstands rain and out the sunlight, and it's the carriage varnishes. They were used, but I'm hard pressed to say that the shellac and wax was as popular as some people like to romanticize.
We had it here, but the reason we knew was if you had shellac, you had to have wax because if you spilled anything on shellac, it just disappeared, mostly alcohols. So they would wax it. But if you didn't wax it enough, you could still eat through the floor. And then if you get the winter, you had salt, sand, water, etc. So I think you had written in one of your articles too. It's interesting, but it's very impractical. But do you think it was because that's what people like to see, or that's, like you said, the hand-me-down? This is all they knew.
Yeah.
To put on the floor.
That's all they had. That's all they had. I mean, I would say I'd really enjoy getting a group of my dad's contemporaries together, from the 1950s and before the big depression, and just say, hey guys, what if, you could put something down that could withstand, that had more chemical resistance, that, gave you better durability and wear. I think that they would have just been falling all over themselves to get to it. I'm sure that a lot of them did a lot of waxing, and they said, no, the waxing is part of the maintenance scheme. And then if you'd have said, and how about this? We're going to mix these finishes with water. I, I would love to have seen the looks on their faces then. I mean, it would have been worth. I'd pay good money to go see
It's a
that.
price of admission.
Mhm.
Explain for me something that a lot of people wouldn't understand. A lot. I have thousands of customers. They don't do restoration. When you're doing a restoration, what is the signal? Like, oh boy, I know you've done some really cool stuff, like old theaters. Last time I spoke with you, and what defines a restoration? Is there a cutoff? Like, 1975 dining room with cat pee in it is
Oh,
not a restoration. What's a restoration for you?
as far as the age of the house, I typically look at least right at 100 years. That to me, I mean, here we are. I'm getting up close to
I
100
feel
years
it. I
before too
feel it,
long.
brother.
But I would say that most of the properties that date back to the 1930s, 1920s, 1930s, and then going back from there. It's not you. There's that category that's based on age. Then there's the historic restoration that takes place because that the house or the facility itself has so much history that you don't. There's a term that you'll hear in the preservation world. The curators of the museums will talk about loss of original material. That is the term, because let's just say, for the sake of argument, that I was working in a house that, where a president within my lifetime had lived. It may or may not be 100 years old, but because of the fact that it was, that family or he was in that place, then it's like we can't remove any of the wood. Again, the wood is the diva. The wood is what you got to protect. The finish that is on top of it is, I'm not going to say it's expendable, but it carries less weight and value than the wood itself. So then you would say you want to keep all the detail, you want to keep all the marks. And by that, we're talking about furniture marks. We're talking about where the piano sat and people would push it around because it's part of the family lore. It's part of how they lived and treated that place. So you kind of have one category it's historic because of what happened there. Then the other category is, it's the age of the property. And that makes it, and a lot of the houses that I work in that are, at least 100 years old, they've already lost so much wood from the traditional sanding, they can't be sanded anymore. So you really don't have whether you want to call it restoration or not. One thing you're not going to be doing is sanding it because it won't take any more loss.
What do you do if you do a historical restoration with something like an oil finish or a craft oil or something, and they have tours, or do they typically put ropes and rugs and things? Because now you can't have that many people walking in there.
No, that's a good question, Stephen. That is kind of an evolving. It's not a problem. A lot of them they put down runners, and some of them can be decorative. I had the opportunity to go back to Montpelier about 4 years ago. I was up in Virginia for a wedding, and I just jumped in the car, drove up there. I hadn't been there since I'd done the work back around 2008, and when I was walking in there, it was really neat. They had a predetermined route that you would follow through the house, and you were going to be walking on these and not on the floor. Now, and so that's one group that does it that way. Others will, you can walk up to the entrance and stand there and look in. Those floors, where you're looking into the room, they are as they were when the family occupied the house. Sometimes they're at area rugs down. Sometimes you're looking at the raw or at the wood. And then one of my last big projects was Edsel and Eleanor Ford's house in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, and there you are allowed to walk directly on the wood, you know, and I told, and I've had some serious conversations with them up there. And I said, okay, folks, you need to understand when I'm looking at a project and I'm trying to evaluate I'm looking at the variables. One of the main things is if you're going to take a private residence and turn it into pretty much a world-class museum, and you're going to start getting tens of thousands of people walking through there. That was not part of the design equation. So you need to look at this and say, how can we make this happen without any damage, without doing damage to the surface? And that's where you just sit the maintenance people down and say, listen up. I'm talking, you're taking notes, and this is how we're going to do it. And I'm one phone call away if there are problems. And, and there's, they can send me photographs. We can do all sorts of stuff. And I'll look at it and say, here's what we're going to do. Sometimes it's just a mild refurbishing. Sometimes it's, like, okay, we need to put something at the entrance during certain times of the year when what they're tracking in might be more caustic, i.e., sand or when there's ice on the ground, you're not just putting down, it's salt. Yeah, salt, sand, and all that. And it's just going to get tracked right in. I mean, you can't have a museum open and as people come in their snow boots, like, okay, or any shoes, like take them off. We're socks only from here on. That's not gonna work. So that's part of the challenge of figuring out what works and what doesn't, or what's appropriate and what isn't appropriate.
What's your portfolio? Like, do you have just the one super recipe right now, or do you in individual cases say, oh, in this restoration, we're going to go with this, or no, we use the same formula now for everything? Or is it different? Does it change?
Yeah, it does change. Some of it's dictated by the circumstances. Large museums, if the rooms are static, nobody's going to be walking in there. At that point, what I would use in the past, I'd used oil modified urethane. Every now and then, somebody'd get their panties in a wad when they heard urethane. It's like, okay, let's just use an alkyd varnish. How about that?
There you go.
And I have had some who said, hey, and this was a direct request. They said, would you wax the floor? It's like, sure. Do you understand what you're getting into, though? Let's sit down and make sure we understand that. And I ended up waxing it. So I will do whatever's appropriate. And I have used waterbornes on some. I have used a lot of hardening oil waxes. That has proven to be a really nice product to introduce, especially down in the South here. We have a lot of pine floors, and those two, pine and the hardening oil waxes, they really do a nice combination. Pine was a very utilitarian wood when it was installed, 100 years ago. It wasn't a showcase. It wasn't the glitz and glamour it is now. I mean, you get reclaimed pine, that's some of the most expensive wood you'll ever buy. But not back then. It was like, hey, we're gonna go with this, and it's just get it down, and then we're just gonna cover it, paint it, or just leave it raw, which they did a lot of times.
I'm going to take you back a little vignette here, go way back to the last time we talked, and we'll revisit this. Just one real quick thing. You had said to me, and I call it the reveal, but you had a name for it. When you're doing a restoration and you say, okay, we're going to leave a small area completely untouched, right? I was calling it the reveal. What was the thing that you called that you will leave so you could see the lead paint, the original finish, the whoever bled on it, whatever? What is that, please?
It is a great term, and I remember the architect, Lane Green. Great. Lane Green and I got along we had a rough start, but eventually we got to he was a wonderful guy. And, had a good Southern accent. He referred to the witness. And I said, what? He said, the witness. What are you talking about? He said, we have to leave a witness to give testimony to how this floor looked when you first walked in here.
I've been calling it the reveal forever. I got to go back and listen to it, but it was the witness. That's what it is.
The witness. Yeah, it's a great term.
I think you were telling me something about you were working on a floor. You could tell me if I was wrong, but it was so historical. I think you said to me, you see that ink spot on the floor? We can't remove that. I go, why not? And you said, because it's from the Declaration of Independence. Like, that's how serious this stuff gets. So that's a witness. Leave that right where it is.
Yeah, that was in James Madison's library, and at Montpelier.
That is something. We're talking about restoration. Most of my customers and the people I do business with and consult with, that's not what they're doing. Every now and then they'll get a really beautiful old building and I'll say, do they want you to restore that, or are you just doing flooring? It's almost never restoration. You've done things like the Fox Theaters. Last time I spoke with you, and all these really cool. As a matter of fact, the last time I spoke with you, you had done the Fox Theater, and I think the last person to play there was Prince. And then he got on a flight leaving the Fox Theater, and he died. He passed away. I'm like, wow, he had just told me about that. That was the mighty Mo organ
Mhm.
in that theater.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a restoration. Those theaters deserve it. It looks beautiful. But tell me, what is an actual restoration specialist? Because I don't think we have them. You might be the only one I know. Does it only, in your case, include flooring, or are there different types of restoration specialists?
For me, it is you walk into the room and you know, the floors are in the condition they're in, and it could be that they've just been down there, they've never been sanded. It could be that they've had some sort of treatment to them, but usually they're very old. But how I define it is they typically have what I characterize as surface accumulation, and that could be anything. I mean, it could be waxes, it could be linseed oil, it could be varnishes. In some cases, it's been moisture cured urethane, which obviously means those floors were treated within the last 50 or 60 years.
Sure.
But those products will come off that surface without any loss of wood, period, which means they cannot be sanded off. And what I did, the term that I use to define my restoration process is called passive refinishing.
Right.
And I use chemicals to put the old surface accumulations back into, they go back into a liquid state. I then extract it, and I do all of this without the loss of any of the substrate, the wood. Now, if they're vertical surfaces, I don't work on them. But if you go into a restoration project and you're looking at what we typically refer to as finish work, which is paint over wood, paint over plaster, paint over this, and then there's marble or whatever, then the code there is there can be no loss of original material. Now, what's been put on the original material since it was installed, that can come off. And that's the challenge in preservation, is to remove all those accumulations. Some people want to grind them off, sand them off, and on all these surfaces. But, and what I've seen is that most preservation work involves some type of liquid or product or paste that puts that material back into solution for long enough to extract it. And then now you're back down to the original surface.
Seems like some of those in between finishes, they just don't even align historically. The-
Oh,
You get
no.
what history,
They-
then junk, and like paint,
Right.
lead paint, then garbage, and then more paint, and then now you got to get it back to what's historically accurate.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of products that were put on there had nothing to do with with the original coating. It's kind of like what we see being done today with acrylics. You know, you go into a house and the floors at one time looked great. Now they're showing a little wear, and somebody says, "Well, just go to run down to the hardware store or get that product we saw online." You take it in there and start smearing it all over the floor, and it goes from there. And as most of us in the business know, it goes downhill from there. And then it becomes a challenge. Okay, how the hell are you going to get that off? All right. Most contractors going to walk in, we're going to sand it off. Well, again, here I am, in 2026, and we just quit sanding anything about 15 years ago. We're not doing it. So we have to find other ways of doing it. And that's what we did. But preservation work, you're leaving the original material intact.
Don't you find a lot of maintenance materials, because that's after you leave, so they go, well, we had so and so do the maintenance. That those things they're very confusing. They're not protective. Don't want to
No.
drop names, but people go, oh, guess what we put on there, and I go, oh, that did not protect this floor.
No, exactly. There's a real disconnect between what was put down there originally to protect the wood. These products that you and I we're talking about, the maintenance products, they come on site simply because the product that was put down to protect the wood is now looking long in the tooth. It's looking frayed. It's lost its luster. So, well, all we need to do then is make it shine again, or make it whatever. That's when they start dumping that, and it has nothing to do with finishes. I've gone on a personal war against that and a few other maintenance and cleaning techniques, steam cleaning floors. I've written as much as I could. People who promote it on YouTube, I've written to several people who are doing it. And I don't usually flash my credentials, but I just said, I do have some experience at this. And I said, you're just wrong. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. And you're going to end up costing people a lot of money. And most of the time, it's like, oh, well, I didn't know. That's right. So, don't go telling people to do this, to do something that's going to, attack the structural integrity of the finish the way these, steam cleaners will, or the way that the acrylics. I mean, that's something I have I'm not inclined to get in people's faces unless I see somebody putting it into a context where I don't know, they're just trying to promote something, or they're trying to be what in current terminology an influencer, which yeah, that just goes right over my head. It's like, what the hell is an influencer?
They're just swinging their bias to where they need it to land. Do you think that in that situation that there's a common, like, there's always some screw up in flooring that you hear and you go, oh goodness, like when people would say, well, everybody knows pre-finished is junk. Everybody knows water-based is garbage. There's all these little these myths. What's like the biggest restoration myth? There's got to be one or two or three of them out there, I would think.
Well, yeah. One of the first is that what I get a kick out of is, I've worked on pine floors that are 100, 150, 200, 250 years old. And I can tell you with no reservations that when I see a guy, and I like to watch these YouTube, we got a bunch of guys out there, they do great work. And they're working on an old pine floor and they talk about restoring it. They go in, sand it, and they, put sealers on it. They put finishes on it. Sometimes it's stain. And, they talk about restoring it. I can tell you unequivocally that no one ever saw, 100, 150 years, they never saw that floor looking like that.
It was never
They would not,
attractive.
they would never identify it.
Right.
That's, and I don't want to knock these guys or these people and say this isn't restoration. I'm not going to, do that kind of thing. I would just say that no, you've taken an old floor, you made it really look good, but you need to be mindful of the fact that you've also taken off a substantial amount of that wood's structural integrity. And that wood floor is going to start every time you sand a floor. I don't care if it's brand new, it's going to start getting weaker. It will. The more mass you lose, you take off above the tongue and groove above the tongue. You're taking away that wear layer. That was there not only to take wear, but also to provide structural integrity. So be mindful of that. And, you know, and they'll get to a point where it can't be sanded anymore. Now we got to rip it out. And see, that's where I was like, no, 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 no. No, you leave that floor alone. That's where my business partner, Jenna Novick, and I come in, and that's what we work with. And we do it all the time. We take repairs. We don't do the repair work. We don't do that whole board repair. You can't do that with wood that's 100 years old. It's old, dry, and brittle, and it almost breaks like glass. So we do a process called the Dutchman. That's all. The only repair work we do is done using a Dutchman. And I've got some good videos probably on my webpage or on my YouTube channel, and I showcase how we've used Dutchman to repair wood floors.
Hey, explain your Dutchman, because when we do furniture, a Dutchman's a little bit of a different thing. It could be a ribbon, a bow, a patch, an insert, like you have a cigarette burn or an ember burn, and you put a little something decorative. But in your case, a Dutchman's a little bit different. Explain your Dutchman process for what you're talking about.
Sure. Let's say you're looking at a floor and you got that classic split right down the long seam where the wood, again, it's been sanded so much that it now splits. You'll start seeing the fault line right over the groove. It's 3/8 of an inch back, and there it is. And it's just going to start splitting, and it'll splinter and come up. So what we do, and I have to give all the credit to my younger brother, David Purser in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's the one that sent me down this road. You go in there with a router, and let's say that whole patch is including where it's split. If it's only one board, then we're going to route out. We're going to route back or route down at least 1/4 of an inch, and we're going to open up that entire cavity. And a lot of times we've been doing it for a long time. We're going to take that and we're going to just drop in the exact thickness of that opening. We square the edge or the corners, and then, it's pre-measured. We're going to put down, if it's an old aged yellow pine floor, then we're going to put down old aged yellow pine. And since we're not doing any sanding, it's got to be, a lot of times it goes in with the stain and with the finish already on it. So that when Jenna drops it in there, and it's going to span over that cavity, so that you're going to have support on either side. And when you look at it, we tell people in advance, you're going to see this, okay? We're not going to make any attempt to hide this and make it look like people say, oh, I can't see. No, you're going to see it. And I honestly, Stephen, I think that people get more excited about the ability it's like, I want to talk. They've told me they spend more time talking about the patches than they do anything else when we do Dutchman. They love them.
Sure.
And because what we're doing is, it's like it's like you're doing surgery.
Sure.
Here's the break, here's the injury. That's all we're going to do. We're not going to amputate your arm and try and put something else. The whole board replacement, the reason we don't do that is you're going to create a weak spot. You're going to create a weakness. You don't have the advantage of the tongue and groove, whereas even if it's 150 years old and you've got that damage, at least you've got the tongue and groove helping you out, and we're not going to disturb that. And it goes in. We got plenty of, I think you guys wanted my social media stuff, and Jenna's put up on our Facebook page, on Instagram. I've got videos of it on our website, because when we go into people's houses, they've got this kind of damage. It's like, what are you going to do? And it's like, well, here, watch this 5-minute video and you'll see. And it works like a charm.
When people look at hardwood floor, they always think, especially if they're laymen, they'll be like, well, I have a 3/4 thick floor. Go back from now till forever. It's about 3/8 of an inch. And when they put the cleat relief in there, or the eagle claw, a few decades ago, that makes it even thinner. People don't remember, in a restoration, you're not about to hit a nice thin flooring cleat. You're about to hit a cut nail that's going to lose half of that 3/8. So you're not going to get to the tongue and groove, which is bad enough. You're going to start hitting steel. And sometimes that's cute, but a lot of times that's not a good thing to be hitting. So like you're saying, even doing a Dutchman, it's got to be super. When you do the Dutchman, is it routed out, chiseled out, cut out, razored out? Like, how do you remove that out of there before you can put your Dutchman in?
Well, it'd be great if we had Jenna on the line to tell you, but when I look at her, she works with a fairly good sized bit, probably at least 3/4 of an inch, half an inch, and it's just going to go down. She has a template, or she'll when I watch her work, it's just fun. She goes in there and she just slaps a couple of boards down. They're rails. They're her guides.
Yep.
And it's not something that's like a piece of plywood with an opening. She just goes in there with wood. She measures stuff real fast.
Okay.
And then she gets down, she routes out the opening. And then she'll take chisels. She'll clean up the corners in particular sometimes. And then she's got a replacement wood that's going to go down. And that replacement wood, when it goes down in there, it has to be flush. It cannot be raised and it can't be below level. So she works with it. So most of the time, by that point, she's just doing some light scraping to remove any kind of height variations. And then she drops it in place, going to glue it in place. And she might use a tiny brad, but she can really, I'm very, very proud of her ability. It's just fun to watch her. I got to keep watching my brother do the same thing. But, Jenna, she came into my business about 6 years ago, I think. I had figured I was going to go ahead and retire, but I was honestly having fun. And I started seeing some of my contemporaries when I go to high school reunions that had retired. And I thought, no, that doesn't look good. No, I like to stay active in it. And fortunately, and we're doing very interesting work where it's just a lot more fun. We work directly for the homeowners.
We had plenty to talk about with Michael Purser, so much that we're breaking this episode up into 2 parts. Keep an eye out for part 2 of our latest chat with him coming soon. You can find links to his latest article and all of his articles and blog posts for Wood Floor Business in the show notes for this episode. And thanks to this season's sponsor of all things wood floor, Odie's Oil, the wood floor finish that is safe and beautiful while delivering a lower cost and higher profit margin. If you liked this episode, please rate and review All Things Wood Floor, and don't forget to subscribe.